believe we're live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and I believe we're live on your Facebook as well. So I don't connect Facebook. I don't know why, actually. I ought to have a look at it, but I haven't connected Facebook. So we're live on...
We use Facebook because in Poland, it's the main business medium. You know,
really?
much more so than LinkedIn or any of the other platforms.
Wow. It's definitely heading that way. And actually, as you know, part of my work is in education. In education, there's a lot of schools on Facebook. There's a lot of head teacher groups and stuff like that. So I really ought to consider connecting this up to Facebook somehow. So I'll take a look. Before we start, Doug, I'm just going to do the usual stuff I do. So for anyone who's listening for the first time, I'll just tell you what Conversation Revolution is. It's a place where myself and the team at Accelerate are really big on conversational selling, conversational customer success work, etc. So we wanted a place to share our experiences with wider audiences, for us to learn, and then for us to get guests on like yourself, like Doug, so that we can talk about topical areas in sales or customer success, or where there might be some crossover. So hopefully everyone listening will learn something from the Conversation Revolution. We do have different channels like WhatsApp as well, but the main one is the podcast via LinkedIn and YouTube, etc. The format sees us release a quarterly training episode, a monthly tactics episode, and then weekly guest episodes, which is what we've got today. So that's Conversation Revolution, which leads me straight into today's episode, which I've titled "What is Mental Toughness, and Does it have a role in sales?" Before we get to the key bit around what is mental toughness and start chatting about that, Doug, I'll just explain how we met. And if I get this right, I'm going to get the timing wrong, I think. Is it close to, trying to do the math, about 6 or 7 years ago we first
Probably
met?
a little bit more than that even, yes.
Yeah.
Now, you were at Doncaster. Damien Allen had just arrived in Doncaster.
Yeah.
And he brought us in and he introduced us, and you were much younger then.
I definitely looked younger, didn't I?
We all did.
Did I have a beard? I bet I didn't have a beard, did I?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, I bet I didn't have the beard. As I put weight on, I've grown the beard to try and elongate my face a little bit, so I look a bit thinner. That's what I've done.
It works.
Yeah. So, always been fascinated with your work, and we keep touching base. This is me, I think. We keep touching base probably in longer periods than we should do, actually, because it's always interesting when we chat. So it probably makes sense for you to tell everyone listening a little bit about yourself, Doug, and the work you do. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, great. So I'm Doug Straharczyk. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for a company called AQR International that has been around, believe it or not, for over 35 years. And we started out life really as a traditional OD consultancy, management consultancy, working with people at the top of organizations, helping them to build better businesses. But bit by bit, I began to understand that there was a missing link, and there was something that we had to measure to understand in order to be able to allow organizations to grow. And unfortunately, I met with Professor Peter Clough. And Peter Clough was researching something called mental toughness. And he was focused on the world of sport. And in the world of sport, people were beginning to understand that, yes, you can look at technique, yes, you can look at fitness, but there was still something else you could do to create world champions or, elite athletes. And that was your mindset. And that's what the mental toughness concept, I suppose, in a sense is. Since then, it's just taken our lives over. So we still do a lot of work with clients, but what we're quite a different business now. We built a huge network of partners around the world, covering 80 countries, and we work and support those partners to do the kind of work we used to do. Yeah. So we want a bigger reach. We want to impact on more people, and we don't just work with organizations. We do a lot of work in the world of education, both secondary education and higher education. We do a lot of work around social mobility, a lot of work in health, and funnily enough, an increasing amount of work in sport.
Yeah.
So we cover everything.
Yeah, there's definitely. I've got an episode coming up. With you mentioned Professor Peter Clough and sport. I've got an episode. It's meant to be next week with an ex-professional footballer, but the side that is an ambassador for Doncaster Rovers have reached the playoffs. So I think it might bounce because the second leg's on the same day. So I'll keep everyone posted on that. But the more I listen to you and the more I look into mental toughness, I think there's definitely synergies from that original sports environment. In fact, more than synergies, actually. I think it's really, really valuable in loads of different workspaces as well. Always find it interesting.
Well, the guy who kind of, before Peter Clough, the person that inspired Peter Clough was a guy called Jim Lower. Jim Lower is an American sports coach.
Right.
Probably one of the two greatest sports coaches of all time.
Yeah.
He literally has trained or worked with over 5,000 world and Olympic champions. And his very first client was Jimmy Connors. So he goes back all that way.
Yeah.
The thing that, he is the guy who coined the term mental toughness. A lot of people don't like the term, but we've kind of really got used to it and we like it. And he coined a term that matters now more than ever before. He says mental toughness is not necessarily about being the gold medalist or the world champion. It's about enabling everyone to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And what he tuned into was we all have abilities, even those of us who think we don't have abilities. And with the right mental approach, we can make the most of that ability that we've got and we can still thrive. And that's a really important message, especially in today's world of diversity, equality, and inclusion.
Yeah.
It's a very important message to a lot of people who think they can't. Well, they can.
Yeah.
We can help them to become much more, enjoy much better well-being and to be able to perform and to be able to look forward to life. That's kind of the underlying messages.
It feels like there should be some sort of a Netflix documentary about that sort of journey. There probably is, to be fair. So I titled this podcast, What is Mental Toughness and What's Its Place in Sales? And I'd started by, so the first question I was going to ask is, what is mental toughness? But you've mentioned mindset and you've just talked about, was it Jim Lowett, did you say?
Yeah, Jim Lower.
Jim Lowett. I think I might switch that and say, I mean, we can come back to what is mental toughness and expand, but is there anything that it isn't?
Well, no, it's a really good one. That's one hell of a question. Only a Yorkshire person could bowl that one at me.
I think it's because so I'll give a bit of context. I think we've probably had conversations in the past, and I seem to recall that as we're talking back and forth about mental toughness and the work you do, and I'll cite an example of something. I haven't got one that comes to mind, and you'll go, no, and you'll tweak my response slightly and leave me thinking, actually, yeah, that's a miles better version of what I said. Or I totally got that wrong. So there's got to be some stuff that it's absolutely not about this.
Well, I suppose one thing we like to stress, a lot of people get mental toughness wrong. They think it's about your behavior. It isn't about your behavior. It's about one of the biggest influences on your behavior.
Right.
So we have a kind of a definition about mental toughness, and mental toughness is an aspect of your personality. We know it's a personality trait. That's important. It means it sits in every single one of us. There's nobody without some level or pattern of mental toughness within us. And that explains our mental responses when things happen to us. And those could be setbacks, could be disasters, but it could be opportunities and it could be challenges. And the interesting thing about mental toughness is it's there irrespective of circumstance. So that separates it from behavior, because you can behave differently at home than you do at work, and people very often do. But if something irritates you at work and irritates you at home, your mental response will still be the same, but your behavior might be different because you're conditioned by things like the different rules in different places, and you might have different support. So mental toughness is fundamentally a more important aspect of your personality. And the interesting thing about it, Chris, is we've always known that to be important.
Yeah.
The first mention is by Plato, the Greek philosopher. He spoke about a concept called fortitude, and he said it was one of the four virtues. And when you look at his work on fortitude, it's exactly the same as the way we describe mental toughness. So he understood that the way you approach life mentally had a big bearing on what you got out of life.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 500 years later, you get the Romans and the Stoics picking up on Plato's ideas and developing Stoicism. And again, Stoicism is what we're talking about. It's understanding that life has its ups and its downs. And
Yeah.
with the right approach, you can take all of that in your stride or not,
Yeah.
depending on your mental approach. And so people have understood that the way you think is important. And the way you think determines why you behave the way you do.
Yeah.
So when we talk about helping people to behave differently or perform better, we often tend to look at their behavior and try to change behavior. That has a limited value. If we can change your mental approach, you can do something much more significant. And that's where we've got to.
Yeah. It's something that sprung to mind was as you was talking then. I was going to say, and it's one of those. I think I just mentioned I sometimes say stuff, and then I think, oh no, that's not quite right. I was going to say, well, no two individuals are the same. But if I've got this right, the way you assess mental toughness through your offer or the offer that you put out to partners, no two people are the same, but one individual can get a different response whenever they do an assessment because they're feeling different at that time, or something's different in their life, or there's a different influence. It's not a one size fit all assessment, is it? You could do it one day.
Right. Okay. We're bringing two ideas together, but they're very important ideas. Firstly, there's no two people are the same. It's so fundamentally important here.
Yep.
In the world of people in organizational development today, we have been trading clapped out old ideas. So there is still so much focus on looking at simple models, black and white models. And so, practitioners have liked typing instruments. You're a color. You're not a color. You're a four-letter combination. You're not a four-letter combination.
Yeah.
In fact, what we know with the mental toughness concept is that there are eight independent components to your mental toughness. And at a very basic level, there are more than 40,000 combinations of those eight factors.
Wow.
So you can have at least 40,000 people in a room and everyone would be different.
Yeah.
And that is the key. There's just a ton of research now that says one size fits all approaches don't work.
Yeah.
You need to customize what you do. But the challenge is, how can I customize what's going on in your head? Because I can't see it.
Yeah.
Well, we can now.
Yeah.
We can explain it. And with the mental toughness questionnaire, we can get a good fix on your mental responses across those eight factors.
Yeah.
So one part, you've touched upon one aspect of it. No two people are the same. Actually, when you look at different levels of the different factors, the number of combinations runs into millions.
Yeah.
So we're actually getting to the holy grail of being able to sit down with somebody and treat them like an individual.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot of that up to now. We like people in boxes.
But as an individual, though, as well. So I've done the questionnaire and I've done it twice, and I got different outputs both times I did it. Now, I don't know if this is. We've never really sat down and talked about the outcome of the assessments, but one of them, when I'm looking back, I think I came out some of the areas higher than I did in the second one. And when I really started to think about it myself, at the point I did the first one, I was settled in my career. I no issues at home in terms of money, the mortgage, that sort of stuff, etc., etc. When I did the second one, I just started a new business. I'd got all the trappings that go with being a founder of a new business, and I'd never really thought about that until I did the assessment and started thinking, why is it different? So it can do that as well, can't it? So the same individual could just do it time and time again, and dependent on outside factors?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a kind of a semi-technical response to that. We know from the research, the University of Western Ontario did the research on mental toughness. They realized it was a personality trait, and they were able to identify that around maybe 55, 60% of your mental toughness is genetic in origin. So it's pretty solid. Your genes aren't going to change dramatically. They can actually, but the rest is experiential. It's the product of your life experiences and the factors that influence your life, certainly up to your, say, early 20s. So your parents, your teachers, and believe it or not, your peers. Your peers are a massive influence on you. And by the time you get to sort of 25, you've probably pretty much settled down on how you'd like to deal with things that you come across. But you've learned that. And the good news is, if you need to unlearn that, you can. And if you need to relearn better or different responses, you can. The only trouble is it takes a bit of time and it takes conscious effort to do it, but you can do it. What that means is, if you move from one set of experiences to another, you can see changes in your mental toughness profile. But most people don't have these sort of dramatic changes in their lives. And for them, because they don't think about it, they don't understand what's happening in their head, they basically don't change. And then often don't understand why something that worked for them yesterday doesn't work for them today. Our challenge is to get people to understand what's going on in their head and help them to be able to get more decisions right than they have in the past.
So that moves me nicely into, if we had to summarize, this is a crazy question, this, because we could spend a couple of hours talking about it, but why is it important? Why is mental toughness important?
Well, because it goes back to something I said earlier. We tend to be very focused on our performance and our behavior. These are outcomes that we really want.
Yeah.
And if you talk, my background is a consultant, and I studied economics, and the thing that you learn is outcomes only happen because you've worked with the right enablers. We never have a focus on the enablers. What is it that will help us to get that outcome? And obviously, one of the key factors in us performing or behaving or even enjoying better well-being is our mental response. So now that we can understand that mental response, we can hopefully achieve these better outcomes. And the research shows we can. So for instance, if you look at performance, the research shows that 25% of the difference in performance can be between individuals can be explained by differences in their level of mental toughness. That's a huge factor. And that's in general, that's on average. That's not every single pair of people that you put together, but that's a big difference. We know that with well-being, the research shows that the mentally tough and the mentally sensitive are equally likely to be anxious, depressed, or stressed, but the mentally tough deal better with it. They don't allow it to get to them. And so there's a big advantage there. We know that in terms of agility, that's looking into the future, dealing with the unknown, or dealing with sudden changes like COVID. I mean, some brilliant research out of Huddersfield University that showed that people who are more mentally tough sailed through COVID. They were setting up businesses and stuff like that. And the more mentally sensitive were, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? I'm shutting up shop. Tell me when it's all over. That sort of thing. Now, I don't want to label mentally tough and mentally sensitive people quite in that way, because what we now know is actually mental toughness isn't always good. It can actually create problems for you. You can actually struggle and fail. And mental sensitivity has some advantages and some assets, and it's perfectly possible for the mentally sensitive to thrive. But the key is self-awareness. If you don't understand your mental toughness profile, then as a mentally tough individual, you can walk into trouble. You can think you can do it all, but you can't.
Yeah.
You're mentally sensitive, you might, be more hesitant. You might be more careful about, stepping forward. But sometimes being more careful is a virtue.
Yeah.
You're not the gung-ho idiot that leaps over a fence to find that there's a sudden drop over the other side of the fence. You've peeked over the fence before you jump, that sort of thing.
I think we had that conversation the first time we ever talked about mental toughness, actually.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember what my profile came out as, and I had asked you a question around, what that meant, and there was somebody else who had just scored really highly, and I think we had the same dialogue. Then you were saying, well, actually, that's not always a strength.
Well, we now work with some more clever academics. Peter Clough's still part of the picture, and one of his former students is a guy who's now Professor John Perry. He's at the University of Limerick, and he's been helping us to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. One of the really interesting things we found is there's one aspect of mental toughness which is called life control. It's where the sense of can-do sits. If you've got a high sense of life control, you think you can do it all because you believe in yourself so much. If you've got a low level of life control, you think, well, right, I'm not sure I can do that. I'm going to take very careful steps. And the problem is that if you put those two types together, one thinks the other's dithering, and the other one thinks that the other's crazy and is nuts. But when I sit down and talk to people, and I say, right, which would you like to be? And they'll often say, I suppose it's better to be more mentally tough in that regard, to have a higher level of life control. Well, the World Economic Forum has just published, well, it has been publishing it regularly, the top 10 most important skills for the 21st century.
Right.
And 2 of those skills are curiosity and innovation. And what we find is, if you've got a high level of life control, this great asset, this gung-ho, I'm going to get there asset, you're actually less likely to be curious and innovative.
Really?
Yeah. So the more mentally sensitive tend to be more innovative. So if we really value this quality in society and in organizations, we need to pay more attention to the more mentally sensitive, who we very often disregard because they are, more hesitant. And when you think about it, when we first saw this outcome in the research, we thought, how? But then it's not that difficult to explain. If you are more mentally tough on life control, have this sense of can do, you tend to be much more in control of everything. So as you're going through life, you tend to control things.
Right.
In order to be innovative and creative, you've got to let go. You've got to let other ideas in.
Yeah.
And so the very quality that looks like a major asset for you, because you are the guy who's going to get this done, it's going to work against you because you might get it done, but suddenly somebody somewhere else, some quieter, meeker person has actually watched what you've been doing and thought, I know a better way of doing that.
Yeah. God, it's crazy, isn't it? Does it work to have? Are there certain profiles of people that work well together, or does it just not work like that?
No, you can use it like that. Once you understand your own profile, you can look at the way you think you come over to other people. That's a great way. It's like using it as like a mirror. How do people see me? But also, you can say, well, okay, I'm this type of person. That person is that type of person. Now I think I understand them a little bit better. Now I understand why I don't relate so easily to them.
Yeah.
And you get things like, one of the scales is interpersonal confidence. If you've got a high level of interpersonal confidence and you get that a lot in leadership, then you might dominate a discussion so much you don't allow in some of the people with low levels of interpersonal confidence. And they want to be engaged, they want to be involved, but they just don't have enough there to be able to say, I'll push my way into this conversation, or I'll put my hand up and make sure I get noticed. They just don't get noticed. And if they're the people also sitting there with the great ideas, you can have leaders of organizations completely ignoring these hidden pools of talents in their own organization. When you ask the question, why is it important? It's so important because it's basically explaining in some detail how we interact with each other, how we get the best out of ourselves and get the best out of each other.
It could be the most important thing when, as you're talking through it, anybody who works with a team or works with themselves as well, actually, to be fair, it could be the most important thing, because you've got to understand yourself and understand those around you, really, haven't you?
Absolutely. And of course, it's this invisible aspect of us, we're differentiating. People will, a lot of consultants, coaches and trainers will focus on behavior, and that can be useful and it's reasonably valid, but we can see behavior, and that's why we're comfortable dealing with behavior. I can't see what's going on in your head.
Yeah.
I can't even see what's going on in my head.
Yeah.
So I need to understand that to be able to do something about my behavior.
It's interesting you've said that, because you said it earlier as well. And I was about to say something when we were talking through the last question around my daughters and saying I can see it in my daughters. And then I thought, no, actually, that's exactly what Doug's saying about behavior. So I can see the behavior.
Yeah.
And I've got two daughters who are different, but I don't know what's going on and why they behave different.
And the thing about behavior, there are 8 factors, and we haven't spoken about those, but I'll just briefly use this as an example to illustrate it. So for instance, and this is a realish example, we try to persuade somebody to go hill walking in North Wales. And that ridge walking can be moderately risky, kind of on a narrow ridge, and you think you might fall off. And we have people who say, no, they won't do it. And the 8 factors are, the first one is life control, the sense of can do. So some people think they can, some people think they can't. That's not me. I haven't got the bottle to do that. There's emotional control. That's the sense of, being able to deal with anxiety and deal with my emotions. So some people will experience, immediately they'll experience anxiety, they'll experience fear, but some people manage that. And other people allow their fears to manage them. The third one is purpose or goal orientation. And that's describing the extent to which I think what I'm doing is worthwhile. Well, maybe that person doesn't think that this is a worthwhile thing to do. Some people do, some people don't. And then there's achievement orientation, and that's about making an effort. Now, to go hill walking in North Wales requires a lot of effort. You're going to be perspiring when you get to the top of the hills. Some people are prepared to make that effort, other people aren't. So then we move around to the other 4 factors. The first one is called risk orientation, and that's about your mental approach to dealing with new things. So some people will see a new experience as, well, I've never done that before, I'd love to do that. Or some people will see it as, I've never done that before, I don't want to go anywhere near it. And then there's learning orientation, and that's saying, well, some people will say, well, I tried something like that before and it didn't work. They're not reflecting. They're not thinking about, well, what was it about that could have gone better? And then you go around to confidence and abilities, and people think about, well, I don't think I've got the ability, the skills, or the knowledge to do that. And they may very well have. I mean, to go hill walking, all you need to do is be able to stand up and walk, put one foot in front of the other. But if you doubt yourself, you think you're going to fall off, you're not going to use those abilities. And the 8th quality is interpersonal confidence. We mentioned that before. That's about the extent to which youth are happy to engage with other people, to get support, to check things out with other people, to ask questions. So if you know you're going to go up hill walking and you're going to go up with a group, you might not think that you're going to be able to relate to the group. You might think you're going to end up being a wimp in the group, so you'll back out. So you can see a simple behavior like, I'm not doing that, could be any of those 8 factors. In fact, it could be 2 of those factors, it could be 3 of those factors, it could be any combination of those factors. So you can't look at behavior and understand what's happening in somebody's head.
And the same goes
where this comes from.
And the same goes as well, doesn't it, if they do it? So it's not just about the person who doesn't do it. The person who's done it might be the same. It might be one of the factors. It might be a combination of 2, 3, 4 that got them to
Yeah,
do it as well.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you could be, risk orientation. You might just want to do this. You've never done this before, and this actually happened to me once. In North Wales, there's a mountain called Tryfan, and there's a North Face. I have climbed the North Face of Tryfan once.
Yeah.
And I was very scared.
Yeah.
And what I learned was not that I conquered my fear. That's really important to understand. But I learned how to manage my fear.
Yeah.
If asked to do that again, I would still be scared.
Yeah.
But I would know if I had to, I could do it.
I mean, not the same as the North Face of Tryfan, but I did tree trekking at Centre Parks once and had exactly the same thing. So I'm terrified of heights. It is the one thing I'm genuinely terrified of. And I don't know. I don't 100% know why I did it. I just know the driving factor was my daughter saying to me, "But Dad, you told me that fear's a choice I make." And I was like, "Oh no!" And now I've got to do it. So there must have been something going on in my head that's aligned to what we're talking about that made me actually, although I can relate it to what my daughter said, there must be something that had gone on my head that's gone, yeah, I need to do this now.
Yeah. And of course, that phrase is half right. Only the more mentally tough in terms of that factor, risk, in terms of anxiety control, can actually choose.
Yeah.
People who don't have that sort of positive response are actually having it chosen for them,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's learning how to bring that back under your control.
Yeah.
And it's possible. All of that is developable,
So if you've got somebody who's really, as long as they understand their profile, we can coach people to get to a better place in terms of this stuff as well, or a stronger place. Let's not say better, a stronger place.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that we now know that development can take two paths. One is, if you want to, you can actually change your profile, but there's no necessary condition for that. You would do that if you learned from understanding your profile that there was an aspect of your profile that was going to give you persistent problems.
Yeah.
And then there is a value in doing something about it if you want to still stay in this sphere of activity. The other option is you can stay who you are, but as long as you're self-aware, you can develop coping strategies for those moments when your profile isn't going to be the optimal profile for that situation. So
yeah, that's really,
you don't have to change. A really good example is musicians or artists. Musicians and artists and performance artists, actors, tend to be, believe it or not, slightly more mentally sensitive than most people.
wow.
Yeah? But that's because they see life through a different lens, mental lens, than the rest of us. And of course, that's what makes them artists. They're seeing the world differently. And through their performance or through their art, they're showing us their vision of the world.
Yeah.
And so if I was somebody like that, Van Gogh, he discovered a different form of painting, used that sort of, I've forgotten the style. He used a different style anyway. And we were able to look at his pictures and see different things in ordinary scenes. But he was mentally sensitive. There's no question about it. He cut his own ear off. He never made any money. He was broke all his life.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't have wanted to change that.
Yeah.
Now, if he decided to become more focused, more hard-nosed, earn a lot more money, he would have been a different artist. He might have lost his art.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I'd loaded the questions in before we started. So this is this one's a slightly. I'm going to change it. So originally I wrote, "Is there a role for mental toughness in a sales environment?" There absolutely is. So I've worked in sales for most of my career. I've worked with hundreds of different sales professionals and probably encountered thousands. And I always come across different reasons for different behaviors. I know we're saying this isn't about the behavior. So talking this through now, if there's anybody who's watching who's from a sales environment, I'd say there absolutely is a place for this in sales. You mentioned 25% of the difference in performance earlier. In sales team, you have those wide differences in performance. But if you could, I know you do some work with Institute of Sales Professionals.
We do.
If you had to summarize why this is really important to sales, so I'm changing the question here. If you had to summarize it, for those listening, why is this really, really important in a sales environment?
Well, if you look at the two big aspects of sales, one is in sales, you're always looking into the unknown.
Yes.
You can't just keep selling to your trusted customers. Some people try to get away with that, but you can't do it forever. Basically, you're always being challenged to find new customers, new markets, new opportunities. And when you look at the mental toughness concept, I talk about risk orientation and learning orientation and confidence in your abilities. These are all aspects of optimism. And so you've got to be optimistic. You've got to believe that there's something out there and an opportunity to be grabbed, and almost have the blind faith to go out and go after it. But there's another side. There's also, people will often identify opportunities and then not close. And there's the closing side, and that's about some of the stuff that we spoke about earlier about your sense of life control, your anxiety control, not being frightened to go and ask and say to somebody, right, how many are you going to buy from me, and what kind of price can we strike? That requires a lot of anxiety control. Lots of people get really nervous about that. And then, of course, the goal orientation and achievement orientation. Any customer I know always values the salesperson who'll go that extra mile. So being prepared to make that effort. But if I step back a little bit, way before I set up this business 35 years ago, when I last had a proper job, I was head of operations for Castrol. Now, Castrol is one of the great sales and marketing companies. They wipe the floor with all of the big competitor oil companies with their products. On the operations side, we used to work to something like 99.5% quality standards. We would just about accept 0.5% of our product being not up to scratch. It might be a damaged package or something like that. So 5 out of, I can't remember, 10,000, something like that. Then I'd go and have meetings with the salespeople, and they'd be talking about celebrating 10% success. They'd go and knock on 10 doors and get rejected by 9. I'm thinking, hang on, if we operated in that sort of environment, we'd be crazy. We'd be tearing our hair out. And here we are, we got people who are trying to sell this product, a really great product, and getting rejected far more often than they're being accepted. And they're still got to keep on getting up in the morning, smile on the face, keeping going. And so the world of sales has a really, really unique set of circumstances. And I often liken it to, they're the athletes of the business world. Because if you look at athletes, competitors, even the best 100-meter runners in the world don't win every time.
No.
They only win 3 out of 10 races. But they'll thrive on that. A salesman has got to thrive on those. I mean, for me, it looks like scraps, but actually for a salesperson, in their eyes, getting that contract is everything to them. They know how to manage that and how to optimize that. But a salesperson lives in a very different world to an accountant or to a delivery operation or whatever. I can remember when we had a crisis of a delivery operation. We had 800 wrong deliveries, and even that only represented a tiny proportion of what we were delivering. It just didn't bear any comparison with the kind of pressures that the salespeople were on. And I learned to be able to understand what salespeople were like, what they needed, why they were so valuable, and actually why a lot of them succumb to a lot of pressure. Because and we're going back 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Not everybody understood that pressure and how it impacted upon salespeople.
It is high pressure, definitely, and you're right. There's a high level of rejection. I've personally never really struggled with the rejection, but the bit you mentioned about closing, in my early career, I struggled with that, and I managed to. I always included the questions that I didn't like asking in the documents that I was showing the customer, so I had no hiding place. I had to ask them because they're on the screen, and that's how I overcome it. But it definitely is high pressure, and I think at the moment as well. Times are hard at the moment, aren't they, in general? And I see more businesses that I speak to where the pressure's pushed down as well. So you've got pressure coming up from below and you've got pressure coming down from the top. And then I might be speaking a little bit unfairly here, but I tend to find there's a tier in the middle around management, some middle management in sales that are middle management because they were the best at what they did in the sales role. In reality, they're not equipped to undertake the sales management role, but they're placed there, and there's very little CPD, etc. So there's also that pressure as well. So in terms,
You're absolutely right, but there's another dimension to this, and it may be something we can explore another time.
Yeah,
we just produced a book on leadership, which is called "Who Cares Wins."
yeah,
and I've got 14 people from all over the world. I mean, pretty much experts in their own field in different countries to contribute. And the one unifying theme that comes through is the most effective leaders do not tell their followers what to do. They create the conditions in which their followers can thrive. In other words, they look after them.
yeah,
And they attend to things like they give them freedom and autonomy, but don't stand over their shoulder and don't shout at them when they get it wrong.
yeah,
They make sure that their staff are competent, know what they're doing. You get I mean, it's a bit like your appointment to the middle manager. Just because somebody's the best salesman isn't a reason for appointing them then without any training and expecting to do a job. Then there's relatedness, and that's so important. In sales, very often sales managers will create competition between salespeople.
yeah,
Whereas the most effective thing you can do is to create team working.
yeah,
You can persuade people to help each other.
yeah,
Rather than I'm going to be the salesman of the month, and
yeah,
I could have helped you here, but I'm after my position. And then the big one is purpose, and that's being able to know that if I'm doing something, I'll make an effort if I think it's worthwhile and it's enjoyable. And good leaders create that sense of purpose. The old regime, and it's still around, harks back to something that was developed by a guy called F.W. Taylor at the end of the 19th century, and it's called scientific management. And for most of the 20th century and a big part of this century, people still practice this. The idea that if I tell you what to do, very clearly what to do, I expect you to do it.
yeah.
The theme there is I'm telling you what to do, and I expect obedience. Well, we're not children.
Yeah. Well, we're not dogs either.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I know I wouldn't respond to that.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Well, we still come across a lot of sales teams, sales organizations that are run like that. And you've got people who are leading those sales team who expect a great performance as a consequence of lousy leadership.
Yeah,
But in order to practice better leadership, you need to have courage. And that's where mental toughness comes in. The more mentally tough a sales manager is, the more likely they are to kind of pick up and adopt the kind of ideas that will motivate their followers.
So if you're in a sales environment and you're watching this, there absolutely is a place for this work. We'll touch on where to find more information in a minute. I'm conscious of time, Doug. I told you I'd pinch 30 minutes of your time, and I've kept you for 44 now. So I've got two other questions jotted down. The first one I think is dead easy. Well, not questions actually. One question and one. No, they are both questions. The first one is, who does mental toughness apply to? And I think the simple answer to that is probably all of us. But
every single person on the planet. And the interesting thing, I mentioned earlier that we get involved in young people's development. All of that has come from, we work with senior leadership teams, and the number of times that somebody in the senior leadership team, at least one person, will come up to you afterwards and say, that was great. Now, how can I do this with my kids?
Yeah.
And there's an important message there, because the earlier we can develop these kind of life skills in people, the better.
Yeah.
But we don't. Our education system doesn't do it.
No. Well, our education system, in my opinion, and I work in education, is broken, and I'm not sure how we fix it. I think it's bigger than just the system's broken. So probably one for a different day, and probably a 3-hour episode, 4-hour episode, or something like that. So the last thing I was going to ask you, so again, every time I'd love to pick up the leadership conversation a different time. Every time I speak to you, I'm totally blown away, and I'm sure anybody else watching will feel the same. So if people are watching this and they want to find out a bit more about what you do and how they can benefit from what you do, where can they find you? I know you mentioned partners as well, though. So
right, no, it's okay. If people come to us, then if it's appropriate to involve a partner, we will. If we can handle it, we will. There are two main reasons why people come to us. One is either they would like to understand something about their own mental toughness. We can do that. If somebody wants to complete the questionnaire and get some feedback on their profile, we can do that. The other group is you will get managers and coaches and trainers that will want to know how they can be trained and incorporate this into their work. The same links apply to both. So for me, it's doug@aqr.co.uk. It's quite straightforward, very simple.
Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very easily accessed through LinkedIn. If you want something from the company and not through me, it's headoffice@aqr.co.uk. It's quite straightforward.
Perfect. I'll share that in the comments. And all that leaves me to say then is massive thank you, Doug. Thank you to everybody who's listening. Don't forget, wrong one. Don't forget to subscribe to Conversation Revolution on YouTube. Don't forget to like, share, repost. It's the best way you can support what we're doing. Other than that, nothing else to say. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. I've enjoyed that too.